December 11th, 1941. The Reich Chancellery in Berlin. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors where the eagle and swastika gleamed in bronze. Adolf Hitler stood before a map of the world, his fingers tracing the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The room smelled of leather, tobacco, and the faint metallic tang of ink from freshly printed intelligence reports. Outside, snow fell softly on the Wilhelmstrasse, muffling the sounds of a city already 4 years deep into total war. On Hitler's desk lay a stack of documents, reconnaissance photographs, naval assessments, production estimates from the United States. He had just declared war on America 4 days after Pearl Harbor, convinced that Japan's surprise attack had crippled the American Pacific Fleet beyond recovery. The Führer believed he had witnessed the death blow to American naval power. He was about to learn he had made the gravest miscalculation of his life. The attack on Pearl Harbor had been devastating. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Japanese carrier aircraft struck the American naval base with precision and fury. 8 battleships had been damaged or destroyed. The USS Arizona lay entombed beneath the harbor waters, carrying over 1,000 sailors to their graves. The USS Oklahoma had capsized. The USS California and West Virginia settled into the mud. Photographs of burning warships, billowing black smoke, and shattered aircraft filled newspapers across the globe. To Hitler, to Mussolini, to military strategists in Berlin and Rome, the images represented a catastrophic blow to American military capability. The Japanese had achieved what seemed impossible. They had neutered the Pacific Fleet in a single morning. Hitler celebrated the news with champagne, convinced that America would spend years, perhaps a decade, recovering from such losses. He envisioned a weakened, demoralized nation turning inward, unable to project force across 2 oceans simultaneously. But what Hitler failed to understand, what the entire Axis leadership failed to grasp, was the nature of American industrial power. They saw the destruction at Pearl Harbor. They did not see the factories in Detroit, the shipyards in Philadelphia, the steel mills of Pittsburgh, the assembly lines stretching from coast to coast. They saw 8 damaged battleships. They did not see a nation with the capacity to build 50 more. They measured American resolve by European standards, by the exhausted economies of Britain and France, by nations bled white after years of conflict. They could not conceive of a country that viewed Pearl Harbor not as a defeat, but as permission to unleash an industrial fury the world had never witnessed. Within weeks of Pearl Harbor, American shipyards roared to life with an intensity that bordered on the supernatural. The Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California, pioneered assembly line techniques for warship construction. Where it had once taken a year to build a Liberty ship, Henry Kaiser's workers reduced the time to weeks, then days. On November 12, 1942, the SS Robert E. Peary was launched just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after her keel was laid, a record that stunned even American observers. But Liberty ships were cargo vessels. Warships were different. Warships were complex, intricate machines of war requiring precision engineering, advanced metallurgy, sophisticated weapon systems. Surely, the Germans reasoned, warships could not be mass-produced like automobiles. They were catastrophically wrong. By early 1942, American naval production had accelerated to levels that defied comprehension. The Essex-class aircraft carriers, massive floating cities of steel and aviation fuel, began sliding down the ways at a pace that seemed impossible. USS Essex herself was commissioned in December 1942, just 13 months after Pearl Harbor. USS Yorktown II followed in April 1943, USS Intrepid in August, USS Hornet II in November. These were not small vessels. Each carrier displaced over 27,000 tons, carried 90 aircraft, housed over 2,600 men. Each represented millions of hours of skilled labor, thousands of tons of steel, aluminum, copper, rubber. And America was building them faster than Japan could produce destroyers. The shipyards worked in shifts around the clock, arc welders throwing blue-white sparks into the night, cranes swinging massive armor plates into position, riveters hammering in rhythms that sounded like mechanical thunder. Women joined the workforce by the millions, welding, riveting, assembling, testing. The famous Rosie the Riveter was not propaganda. She was reality, multiplied by hundreds of thousands across industrial America. Hitler received the first intelligence reports of American production capacity in early 1942. He dismissed them as Allied propaganda. The numbers were absurd, impossible. No nation could build warships at such speed. No economy could sustain such output while simultaneously feeding its people, housing its workers, maintaining civilian morale. The reports claimed America was producing one merchant ship every day, aircraft carriers every few months, destroyers and submarines at rates that exceeded the entire German naval construction program. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, reviewed the intelligence with growing alarm. Speer was a realist, an engineer who understood industrial logistics. He recognized the reports were likely accurate. When he presented his analysis to Hitler, the Führer's response was volcanic. "Lies!" Hitler shouted, slamming his fist on the map table. "American propaganda! They build automobiles and refrigerators, not warships." His voice echoed through the conference room where senior military staff stood silent, unwilling to contradict their leader. But the evidence continued to accumulate. Reconnaissance flights over. American ports photographed dozens of warships under construction simultaneously. German intelligence agents in neutral countries reported trainloads of war material moving to coastal shipyards. Intercepted communications referenced production quotas that seemed fantastical. And still, Hitler refused to believe. He clung to the comforting fiction that America was a nation of capitalist weaklings, softened by luxury, incapable of sustained sacrifice. He remembered the United States from the previous war, a late arrival, tentative, still learning the brutal arithmetic of industrial conflict. He did not grasp that America had learned those lessons well and had emerged from the Great War as the world's largest creditor nation, its industry intact, while Europe's factories lay in ruins. What Hitler also failed to understand was the fundamental difference in military philosophy between the Axis and Allied powers. German and Japanese military production emphasized quality, precision, individual craftsmanship. A panzer tank was a masterpiece of engineering, each one meticulously assembled by skilled workers. A Zero fighter was lightweight, maneuverable, deadly in the hands of an experienced pilot. But both took time to build, required specialized materials, could not be easily mass-produced. American military philosophy embraced a different approach. Good enough, right now, in overwhelming numbers. The M4 Sherman tank was not as heavily armored as a Panzer or as powerfully gunned as a Tiger. But America built 50,000 Shermans. Germany built 6,000 Panthers and was out to 300 Tigers. When 5 Shermans faced 1 Tiger, the Tiger might destroy 2 or 3 Shermans, but the remaining Shermans would destroy the Tiger. Mathematics replaced heroism. Production capacity trumped technical superiority. By mid-1942, the Pacific Fleet had not only replaced its Pearl Harbor losses, it had exceeded its pre-war strength. The battleships that had been sunk or damaged were either salvaged and returned to service or replaced by newer, more powerful vessels. But more significantly, America's strategic focus had shifted from battleships to aircraft carriers. Pearl Harbor had inadvertently revealed the future of naval warfare. Air power, not big guns, would dominate the seas. The Japanese attack had destroyed America's battle line but had missed the carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga had been at sea during the attack. These carriers formed the nucleus of a rebuilt fleet that would grow to dominate the Pacific. By 1943, the United States Navy operated more aircraft carriers than all other nations combined. By 1944, American carriers outnumbered Japanese carriers by a ratio of nearly 10-1. The moment Hitler fully grasped the magnitude of his miscalculation came in late 1942, during a situation briefing at the Wolf's Lair, his military headquarters in East Prussia. Admiral Karl Dönitz presented updated intelligence on American shipbuilding capacity. The numbers were no longer disputable. Reconnaissance photographs showed the proof. Captured documents confirmed the estimates. America was producing warships, merchant vessels, landing craft, submarines, and support ships at rates that exceeded the combined output of Germany, Italy, and Japan. The United States was launching more tonnage in a month than Germany could produce in a year. Hitler's face, witnesses later reported, turned ashen. His hands trembled as he studied the photographs. For several minutes he said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked the question that revealed the depth of his strategic blindness. How is this possible? The answer was complex, but fundamentally simple. America possessed resources the Axis powers could only dream of. The United States was geographically isolated from direct attack, protected by two vast oceans. Its factories operated without fear of bombing raids. Its workers lived without rationing comparable to European standards. Its oil fields pumped millions of barrels daily. Its farms produced food surpluses that fed not only American civilians and soldiers but Allied forces across the globe. Its financial system, backed by gold reserves and a robust economy, could sustain war production through bonds and taxes without collapsing into hyperinflation. Most critically, America's industrial infrastructure was not merely large, it was adaptable. Automobile factories retooled to build tanks. Refrigerator plants converted to aircraft production. Civilian industries pivoted to military output with astonishing speed, guided by government contracts and motivated by patriotic fervor. But there was something else, something intangible that Hitler and his generals could not quantify. American optimism, the belief in progress, in innovation, in solving problems through ingenuity rather than ideology. German soldiers fighting in North Africa or Russia were sustained by belief in racial superiority, by discipline, by fear of failure. American soldiers were sustained by letters from home describing new cars, baseball scores, movies, and the promise of opportunity after victory. They fought not because they feared their leaders or believed in a mystical destiny, but because they believed in the world they would return to. This psychological difference manifested in production lines. American workers built ships and planes not out of compulsion, but out of conviction that their labor mattered, that each rivet driven brought victory closer. The symbolic object that came to represent American industrial supremacy was not a weapon or a warship. It was the humble Liberty ship, those mass-produced cargo vessels that carried the material of war across the Atlantic and Pacific. German U-boats hunted them relentlessly, sinking hundreds. But for every Liberty ship that slipped beneath the waves, 3 more slid down the shipways. Admiral Dönitz calculated that Germany needed to sink Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced to win the Battle of the Atlantic. In 1942, U-boats achieved their highest kill rates, sending millions of tons to the ocean floor. But American shipyards produced nearly 8 million tons of new shipping in 1942 alone. In 1943, production jumped to 14 million tons. By 1944, 19 million tons. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. Germany could not sink ships faster than America could build them. Each Liberty ship represented a small victory, a refutation of Axis strategy, a floating testament to industrial democracy. Hitler's response to these realities evolved through stages of denial, rage, and finally, fatalistic acceptance. In 1942, he ordered increased production quotas for German industry, demanding miracles from factories already operating at maximum capacity. When those quotas proved unattainable, he blamed sabotage, defeatism, Jewish conspiracies, anything except the fundamental truth that Germany lacked the resources, the population, the geography, and the economic model to compete with American industrial output. In 1943, as Allied victories mounted, Hitler retreated into fantasies of wonder weapons, V-2 rockets, jet aircraft, super-heavy tanks, technological solutions to strategic problems. These weapons, brilliant though some were, came too late and in too few numbers to alter the war's trajectory. By 1944, with Allied armies closing from east and west, Hitler's references to America in military conferences became bitter, laced with recrimination. He had gambled that American democracy was weak, that its people lacked the stomach for prolonged sacrifice, that its industrial capacity was inflated by propaganda. He had lost that gamble catastrophically. The voices of those who witnessed Hitler's realization remain fragmentary but telling. Albert Speer, in his post-war memoirs, wrote, "Hitler's underestimation of American productive capacity was perhaps his greatest strategic error, greater even than invading the Soviet Union. He saw America as we wished it to be, divided, isolationist, decadent, not as it actually was, united, determined, and possessed of industrial power we could never match." General Alfred Jodl, Hitler's chief of operations, later testified that by 1943, Hitler knew the war was unwinnable but refused to admit defeat, clinging to increasingly desperate hopes of political collapse among the Allies. Admiral Dönitz noted in his diary that Hitler seemed haunted by reports of American production, sometimes questioning whether the intelligence was fabricated by his own staff to undermine his confidence. But perhaps the most revealing comment came from Hitler himself, recorded in the notes of a conference in January 1943, shortly after the Casablanca Conference where Roosevelt and Churchill demanded unconditional surrender. When informed that American aircraft production had exceeded 48,000 planes in 1942 and was projected to reach 85,000 in 1943, Hitler responded, "If these numbers are true, then we have already lost the war. Not on the battlefield, in the factories of Detroit. We are fighting industrial output, not armies, and you cannot defeat an assembly line with courage alone." The statement was uncharacteristically candid, a rare moment when ideology gave way to cold arithmetic. But the moment passed. Within minutes, Hitler was again ranting about secret weapons and strategic breakthroughs that would turn the tide. The contrast between what the Axis leadership expected and what they encountered defined the war's trajectory. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, famously warned before the attack that Japan could run wild in the Pacific for 6 months to a year, but if the war lasted longer, he had no confidence in victory. Yamamoto had studied at Harvard, served as a naval attaché in Washington, traveled across America. He understood American industrial potential in ways Hitler never did. His pessimism proved prophetic. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Battle of Midway destroyed 4 Japanese carriers and shifted the Pacific balance permanently. Yamamoto had hoped Pearl Harbor would demoralize America, force a negotiated peace, buy time for Japan to consolidate its conquests. Instead, Pearl Harbor galvanized American resolve and justified unlimited industrial mobilization. Similarly, German expectations of America were shaped by the propaganda of American isolationists, by reports of labor strikes and political divisions, by the lingering trauma of the Depression. German intelligence accurately reported that America was politically divided before Pearl Harbor, that millions opposed intervention, that the economy was still recovering from collapse. What they missed was the speed with which Americans could unite when attacked, the degree to which political differences dissolved in the face of external threat. The strikes ended. The divisions healed. The economy, stimulated by war contracts and full employment, roared back to life with unprecedented vigor. By 1944, American GDP had nearly doubled from pre-war levels. Unemployment had vanished. Factories operated 24 hours daily. The American people, far from buckling under rationing and sacrifice, accepted restrictions with patriotic determination. Victory gardens sprouted in backyards. Scrap metal drives collected millions of tons. War bonds sold by the billions. The social fabric that Hitler expected to fray under pressure instead tightened, binding the nation together in common purpose. The transformation this experience wrought was not merely military or economic. It was psychological and ideological. American soldiers who witnessed the material abundance of their own military forces compared to captured Axis equipment understood viscerally that they represented a different kind of civilization. Captured German soldiers in North Africa reported being astonished by the quality and quantity of American food: white bread, canned fruit, chocolate, coffee. Japanese soldiers in the Pacific, often starving in isolated garrisons, discovered American supply dumps stocked with luxuries unimaginable in their own forces. The ideological contrast was stark. Axis forces preached sacrifice, hardship, death before dishonor. American forces demonstrated that prosperity and victory were not mutually exclusive, that soldiers fought better when well-fed, well-equipped, and confident they would return home to a good life. This ideological dimension of the war, this battle between systems as much as between armies, became clearer as the conflict progressed. Hitler's vision was predicated on hierarchy, racial destiny, the glorification of suffering and struggle. The American vision, imperfect and flawed though it was, rested on abundance, opportunity, and the idea that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when given tools, training, and trust. The assembly lines that produced 300,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, 3,000 warships, and 5,000 cargo ships during the war years were staffed not by slaves or pressed labor, but by free workers earning wages, buying homes, planning futures. This fundamental difference, free labor versus coerced labor, manifested in productivity statistics that consistently favored democracies over dictatorships. Free workers innovated, suggested improvements, took pride in their output. Coerced workers did the minimum necessary to avoid punishment. The Liberty ship became the symbol of this contrast. Each one was ugly, utilitarian, welded rather than riveted to save time, designed for quick construction rather than aesthetic appeal or longevity. Critics called them ugly ducklings, but they worked. They crossed oceans, survived torpedo attacks, some were even torpedoed, repaired, and returned to service, and delivered the goods that sustained Allied forces on every front. German submariners came to hate them, not for their strength, but for their numbers. Sinking one accomplished nothing when two more appeared the next week. The Liberty ship represented democratic industrial capitalism, pragmatic, efficient, relentless. Each one was a floating refutation of fascist ideology, proof that free societies could outproduce, out-innovate, and ultimately outfight totalitarian regimes. By 1944, the strategic consequences of Hitler's miscalculation about American production were catastrophic for Germany. The Normandy invasion was possible only because of overwhelming material superiority. 7,000 vessels, 12,000 aircraft, millions of tons of supplies stockpiled in Britain. The Americans and British arrived in France not as desperate defenders, but as an industrial avalanche, bringing with them floating harbors, prefabricated ports, entire field hospitals, mountains of ammunition, forests of vehicles. German defenders, already stretched thin on the Eastern Front, faced an enemy that seemed to possess infinite resources. Every destroyed American tank was replaced. Every downed aircraft was replaced. Every casualty was replaced. The Wehrmacht, bleeding out in Russia and Italy, had no such luxury. German soldiers fought with dwindling ammunition, patched together vehicles, depleted ranks filled by teenagers and old men. The psychological impact on German forces was profound. Intercepted letters from soldiers on the Western Front revealed growing despair, expressions of hopelessness against such material superiority. One soldier wrote home, "The Americans shell us for hours, then advance behind a wall of steel. We fire until our ammunition runs out, then retreat. The next day they do it again. They have endless shells, endless tanks, endless men. We have courage and nothing else. Courage is not enough." This sentiment echoed across German lines in France, Italy, and eventually Germany itself. The ideology of racial superiority, of willpower triumphing over material weakness, collapsed in the face of American abundance. Victory required not just bravery but bullets, fuel, food, reinforcements, all the things Germany could no longer provide in adequate quantity. Hitler's final comments on American industrial capacity, recorded in the last months of his life as Soviet artillery pounded Berlin, reflected the bitterness of total defeat. In April 1945, hiding in the Führer bunker as his empire disintegrated, Hitler reportedly told his inner circle, "We never had a chance once America entered the war. I see that now. We were fighting factories, not armies. You cannot defeat factories with soldiers, no matter how brave. Every calculation was wrong. Every assumption was wrong. We thought them weak. They were strong. We thought them divided. They were united. We thought victory was possible. It was never possible. Not after Pearl Harbor. Not after they chose to fight." The admission came too late to matter, in a bunker 50 feet underground, spoken to men who knew they would be dead within weeks. The epilogue to this story of miscalculation and industrial might extended far beyond 1945. The factories that built Liberty ships and aircraft carriers did not close after victory. They converted back to civilian production, flooding the market with automobiles, appliances, housing materials, consumer goods. The workers who welded warships became the middle class of post-war America, buying homes in new suburbs, sending children to college on the GI Bill, enjoying prosperity that would have seemed impossible in 1941. The military-industrial complex that won World War II became the foundation of American Cold War power, capable of sustaining military strength while maintaining high standards of living, a combination the Soviet Union would eventually prove unable to match. The lesson Hitler learned too late was the one that defined the 20th century. Industrial democracies, for all their apparent chaos and inefficiency, possessed adaptive capacity that rigid ideological systems could not match. Free markets mobilized for war more effectively than command economies. Free peoples fought more effectively than coerced soldiers. Free societies innovated more rapidly than totalitarian regimes. These were not abstractions or propaganda. They were measurable realities visible in production statistics, casualty ratios, and the final victory. The battleship Arizona still rests in Pearl Harbor, a tomb for 1,177 sailors. But above the water, the American flag flies from a memorial visited by millions, a symbol not of defeat, but of resurrection, of a nation that absorbed a devastating blow and responded with overwhelming force. What Hitler said when he learned America had already replaced all Pearl Harbor losses was ultimately less important than what he failed to say, failed to understand, failed to grasp until far too late. He never understood that attacking America was not like attacking Poland or France or even Russia. It was attacking an idea, the idea that free people, organized by consent rather than coercion, could achieve what dictators only dreamed of. That idea, forged in the fires of industrial war, validated by the victory of assembly lines over ideology, became the defining lesson of the conflict. Hitler's thousand-year Reich lasted 12 years. The American model, imperfect and constantly contested, endured and spread. The factories that built the weapons of victory became the factories that built the prosperity of peace. The soldiers who fought under the banner of democracy returned home to claim its promises. And the lesson, that freedom is not weak, that democracy is not decadent, that abundance can be a weapon more powerful than any army, echoed through the decades that followed. A truth purchased with blood and steel, but proven in the shipyards of Philadelphia, the assembly lines of Detroit, and the factories that never stopped running, day or night, until victory was complete. In the end, Pearl Harbor was not America's defeat. It was the moment America stopped debating whether to fight and started building the tools to win. Hitler saw the burning battleships and thought he had witnessed a death. He had actually witnessed a birth. The birth of a military-industrial power that would reshape the world, not through conquest or ideology, but through the simple, devastating arithmetic of production. The Liberty ships, ugly and utilitarian, carried that truth across every ocean. And history, written in steel and oil and the sweat of free workers, recorded the verdict. Democracy, armed with industry, was unstoppable. Hitler learned that truth in fragments and denials. In intelligence reports he refused to believe, and production statistics that rewrote the mathematics of war. By the time he fully understood, Berlin was burning, his empire was ash, and American factories were already planning the peace they would build with the same relentless efficiency they had brought to war. The ships kept sailing, the factories kept running, and the lesson, written in fire across the Pacific and Atlantic, remained. Never underestimate a free people determined to remain free. That determination, multiplied by industrial capacity, is the most powerful force on Earth.